Hello again. Welcome to the reproductive anatomy lectures. I'm going to divide this up into two video lectures for the anatomy of the reproductive system, and I'm likely to recommend to you on Blackboard that you go ahead and do these anatomy lectures before you start the physiology so that you have some familiarity with the structures that are going to be discussed over on the physiology side. So be sure you have your study guide listing, because that's going to list all of the parts that you need to know. You don't need to be able to identify anything beyond what's listed on the study guide. Those terms that are listed on the study guide will be your answers to anatomy questions on the exam, so keep that in mind. And go ahead, and if you haven't done so already, you probably want to print out the PowerPoint and the labeling diagrams for the anatomy video lectures as well as we go through this. And I'm going to do some of this from PowerPoint images, using images from your textbook, and in other cases I'm going to flip over to visible body so that we can get a 3D view of the things that we're taking a look at, and visible body will give us a better perspective on some of these anatomical features since it has better three-dimensionality to it. All right, so we're going to do the male reproductive anatomy first, and the first term on your study guide for the male anatomy is the scrotum. The scrotum is the skin-covered, let's see, is my pen showing up here? Let me change colors. The scrotum is the skin-covered sac that hangs down below the abdominopelvic cavity. Now, inside the scrotum, males have two testes, and testes are the primary sexual organs. Testis is singular with an I. The other one is in here. This diagram from your textbook is showing some of the overlying connective tissues and muscle tissues which surround the testes. All right, so the testes are your primary reproductive or sex organs in a male. So that's not what people always think of as being the primary sex organ for a male, but the primary sex organs or reproductive organs are defined as those that produce the cells of reproduction, your gametes. So in males, those are the sperm cells. In females, those are the ova. Another term for that is egg cell. So the organs that produce those are considered to be your primary reproductive organs. So testes in the male. In the female, it's the ovaries. All right, so if you look inside a testis, I'm going to flip over. Sorry about that, my office phone rang there for a minute. All right, so this is a diagram from your textbook which is actually showing, okay, so this whole thing, oops, I can get my pen up. This whole, your scrotum would be here, and you're looking at one testis right in here, this little egg-shaped structure. Now on the inside, over on the physiology side, we're going to be talking about the function of these different things, but you would find a whole bunch of these wrinkled up little tubules inside there, and those are your seminiferous tubules. So all throughout the inside of a testis. And those are actually going to be the sites where sperm cells are formed. Now the rest of the structures you see over here we're going to talk about shortly. Over in here you have your epididymis, and that's going to lead to a vas deferens or a ductus deferens that I'm drawing in there, but we'll talk about those shortly on some other diagrams. I do want to point this out as well before we leave the testis. This is, all right, let me back up over here. If you cut open a testis, sliced it with a blade, and you cut through some of those seminiferous tubules, they're 3D roundish structures. So if you cut those open and looked at those in 2D, this is what you would see if you were looking at them in cross-section. Oh, I keep turning my pen off. All right, so there you're looking at a seminiferous tubule in cross-section. Here's another one over here. Here's another one over here. Here's a little bit of a part of one over here. So these things are all wadded up around each other. And so if you have a blade passing through a wad of those tubules, and then you put that little thin 2D slice of tissue on a slide and stained it with some dyes, this is what you would see. And so the things that I outlined, you're looking at a cross-section of seminiferous tubules. So this is actually the lumen of a seminiferous tubule. Over here you have a lumen, over here you have a lumen. And the lumen is actually where the sperm cells that have been formed wind up, and then they get pressed out through smooth muscle contractions to squeeze them out of the testis and on into the epididymis, which is the next male structure through which these are going to pass. But all in here, you see all these purple spots in here? Almost all of those are the nuclei of cells that are involved in sperm cell production. And so we'll be talking about that over on the physiology side. Sperm cell production actually takes place within the walls in here of the seminiferous tubules inside the testes of the males. Okay, but then notice over in here you've got all this filler space between the seminiferous tubules, and you have cells within that filler space as well, like right in there and over here. Wherever you see those dark purple spots, the dyes that are used to stain tissues like this, when you look at them under the microscope, there's a pink one and a purple one, and nuclei, the DNA inside the nuclei takes up the bluish purple dye really well. So nuclei always have kind of a bluish purple color. So those are called interstitial cells. So over in here, at least some of those cells are likely to be what are called interstitial cells or interstitial endocrine cells. And they're located in these tissue spaces between the seminiferous tubules. The reason they're important is because they're actually the cells that produce testosterone, the male sex hormone. The majority of that in a male is produced by those cells, and we'll be talking a whole lot more about that over on the anatomy side, physiology side, I'm sorry. All right, some other structures here. I think I'm going to go ahead and flip over to visible body and take a look at the next series of structures. We will bring up, all right, here are the male reproductive structures. We can see the skeletal system here, but the other organs of the abdominopelvic cavity have been removed so that we can see these structures that are important for male reproduction a little bit better. All right, so right there and over here as well, you have your two testes that we were just talking about. So those are the sites of your sperm cell production. I'm going to deselect those. All right, so sperm cells are first made there, and then they enter this structure, and you got another one over there behind the left testis. Those are, each of those is called an epididymis. And inside each epididymis, you have a very long system of tubules that are actually in total about 20 feet long. And the sperm cells gradually move through those long, wadded up, folded up tubules inside the epididymis. And while they're in there, they continue their maturation processes and they learn how to swim. Sperm cells that come out of the testes are actually not capable of swimming yet. All right, and then from there, they move into these structures. You got a long tube there and one over here on the left-hand side as well. And each of those is a vas deferens, or ductus deferens is another term that your textbook uses. So the sperm cells move out of an epididymis and they start gradually working their way up the ductus deferens on each side, or vas deferens on each side. Now this, the vas deferens down here in the scrotum, so all this part hanging outside the body is going to be within the scrotum. It's actually wrapped up, it's bundled up in a structure called the spermatic cord, and within that spermatic cord you have blood vessels and nerves as well, but we'll take a look at that on another diagram shortly. The visible body didn't do such a great job of modeling the spermatic cord. And also, as you can probably tell, the vas deferens is going to have to enter the abdominopelvic cavity. And so there is an opening through which that's going to pass. Let me rotate our male model around over here, because you can see each vas deferens has a pretty crazy journey that it takes. Comes around the top part of the bladder here and works its way around the back side of the bladder. And let me zoom in right here, because you can see where it's getting wider right there and right there. Where it gets wider, that's called the ampulla of the vas deferens. All right, let me deselect those. Now while we're still back here, notice you got a structure right there and right there. Each of those is a seminal vesicle or a seminal gland. Your textbook is calling those the seminal glands, pretty much. And as we'll talk about over on the physiology side, those glands produce 70% of the contents of semen. So semen is going to contain the sperm cells that have worked their way through each vas deferens. But that doesn't contribute a lot of volume to the semen that actually gets ejaculated out of the male. 70% of the volume of the semen comes from the seminal vesicles. And over on the physiology side, we'll talk about the contents of the secretion of these seminal vesicles. All right, this gland, we took a look at this when you guys were covering the urinary system. That's the prostate in the male. It's actually about the size of a peach pit, and that sits inferior to the bladder. And so I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to hide that. Now, visible body, the reason why I dissected that off, that's a capsule that surrounds the prostate that I just got rid of. And there's the prostate itself. And in here, we're not going to study these structures. These are some of the internal structures of the prostate that are producing prostate secretion. So the prostate gland is also an exocrine gland that secretes fluids that also become part of the semen that's going to be ejaculated out of the male when that occurs. So visible body is showing you when you go deep inside the prostate gland, these are the secretory structures that produce those fluids, and those get squirted into the urethra. So you may remember from the urinary system anatomy, a portion of the urethra in a male actually passes through the inside of the prostate gland, and the reason for that is it's going to pick up these prostate fluids to add those to semen just before an ejaculation takes place. Okay, let me hide those so I can reveal something else back here. All right, so this kind of brownish structure here, that's the vas deferens on each side, seminal vesicle. Notice how, all right, so glands that produce exocrine secretions, think that are going to get secreted onto a surface and not into the bloodstream, those have ducts, little tubes that carry those secretions away. And the seminal vesicles do have ducts, they're just very short. Because the seminal vesicle, the duct of each seminal vesicle, those merge with each vas deferens, and that leads to an ejaculatory duct on each side. You have one of those on the left and one on the right. Sometimes when you're looking in the textbooks, it looks like you just have one ejaculatory duct, but there are actually a couple of those that are very, very close together. All right, so at this point what's going on is you've got the sperm cells that are combining with the fluids from the seminal vesicles inside the ejaculatory duct. And those ejaculatory ducts lead to this first part of the urethra in the male, right in here. And the urethra, during ejaculation, your internal urethral sphincter up here that we learned about over on the urinary system, that closes, so that prevents any urine from traveling out of the bladder and into the urethra. And that allows these prostate fluids, these prostate secretions, to combine in here with the fluids from the seminal vesicles and also the sperm cells that traveled up each vas deferens. So all those things are combining together in here to form semen. And the semen mixes together in here, and then it's going to get ejaculated out of here and through the inside of the penis to the outside world. The outside world, or wherever it's going to be released. All right, a couple of other structures to show you on here, and it's easier to see on visible body than it is over in the textbook usually. Those two little bitty structures you see right there, each of those is a bulbourethral gland. And if we kind of zoom in here, you can see each of those has a little tiny duct on it, and those ducts actually connect. They pass through these tissues of the penis that you see here and connect into the urethra. Those glands produce a lubricating fluid that gets secreted before ejaculation. That fluid passes down the urethra through the inside of the penis to the outside of the penis, and it helps lubricate the penis for sexual intercourse. And the fluids that these glands produce also reverse the acidic conditions that exist inside the urethra because of the urine that has been passing through it. The acidic conditions inside the urethra are actually toxic for sperm cells. So the secretions of the bulbourethral glands actually get the urethra ready to be a more inviting environment for sperm before they get ejaculated through the urethra. All right, and let's see. So as we saw over on the urinary system side, the rest of the urethra is passing through these tissues here inside the penis. And then here you have the opening, the external urethral orifice. So your sperm cells, of course, are going to exit through that opening just like urine does. And let's see, let's talk about the features of the penis. So the head of the penis is officially anatomically known as the glans of the penis, or the glans penis is the name of it. And this here on visible body, it's not showing it. I'll show it to you on a diagram. But if this is covered, if a male is uncircumcised, it is covered with the foreskin, which is also known as the prepuce. So that's another feature you'll need to be able to identify on the male. And the purple and brown, so these are tissues that are inside the penis, obviously. And these are erectile. Most of these are erectile tissues. All right, so notice on this top portion of the penis up in here, you have two cylinders of erectile tissue. So those fill up with blood, and then that causes erection of the penis. This part of the penis up in here is actually called the dorsal portion of the penis, which means back. Dorsal means the back side. So you have to think about the penis being in an erect, functional position. Then this portion would actually be posterior. And the underside under here would be anterior in that situation. So each of these is a corpus cavernosum. But there are two of them, and the plural form of that is corpora cavernosa. So you've got these two cylinders. Another thing I want to point out to you, notice, if we're looking at this view here, those tissues actually extend internally into the body. They kind of look like wings here, one flaring off to the left and one off to the right. Those are obviously inside the body of the male, and they're attached to bone, the pelvic bones and surrounding muscles. So those portions of the corpora cavernosa help anchor the penis. And those are called the crura together, where it kind of looks like wings. Crura, C-R-U-R-A, on your study guide for the anatomy portion. All right, then underneath there, deselect those. The sort of brownish gold tissue here on the model, that is also an erectile tissue, and that's called the corpus spongiosum. So that also fills up with blood during an erection. And if we hide that, you can see inside there's your urethra. It's actually passing through corpus spongiosum. So you only have one of those. You've got two corpora cavernosa. Okay, I think that's it for visible body on the male. Let me show you a couple of other things here on the diagrams from your textbook. Go back up here. On this first diagram, do you see here, I probably should have pointed this out when we were on here before. Come on, iPad, wake up so I can actually draw on the screen. Okay, it finally did. Right in here, do you see how you have a bundle? You've got the vas deferens in there, or the ductus deferens, but you've also got blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic vessels, and they're all wrapped up in a connective tissue covering. So that bundle is called the spermatic cord. All right, and that spermatic cord has to enter the abdominopelvic cavity. So right up in here is where that opening is going to occur. So as that spermatic cord is passing out of the scrotum and into the abdominopelvic cavity, it's going to have to pass through the muscular wall of the bowl of the pelvis there. And that passageway is called the inguinal canal that spermatic cord is going to pass through. And then here's your vas deferens portion here, where it kind of arches around like this and then heads back over here to the bladder and then curves around the back side of the bladder on each side. All right, let's see. Oh, you know what? One thing I did forget to point out on visible body, we'll take a look at these different male tissues on this cross-section diagram from your textbook as well. Just so we can practice this type of view, since this is a type of view you see a lot on diagrams. So obviously here we have our scrotum, there's your testis, epididymis, here's your vas deferens that's actually going to be inside the spermatic cord, and then it's going to pass through that inguinal canal, which is not really depicted here, wraps around the back side of the bladder, and then it widens. There's your ampulla, and then right in there, there's the seminal vesicle over on this side. Just keep in mind that you have two of those. That's why visible body is nice, because you can actually see that a lot more clearly. And then the contents of the vas deferens and the little duct from the seminal vesicle, those combine to form an ejaculatory duct. But you do actually have one of those on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And then here's your urethra passing through the prostate gland there in yellow. There's your urethra. And the urethra is passing through on the cross-section there through the section through the penis there that we're taking a look at. You can tell you've got a slice through the lower erectile tissue, the corpus spongiosum. The urethra is passing through that. And then the top tissue that looks a little less speckled, that's the corpus cavernosum on that one side. So you actually have two of those. Those are your corpora cavernosa. But corpus cavernosum would be singular. And then over here, that's the bulbourethral gland. So remember, you got two of those, and there's a duct from each one of those that connects into the urethra. So the secretions of the bulbourethral gland will enter the urethra and then travel through the urethra to the outside of to the opening, the external urethral orifice. One thing I forgot to point out over on visible body. So back in here, the corpus spongiosum, does extend into the abdominopelvic cavity, and that's called the bulb of the penis. So you had the crura, the two little wings of the corpora cavernosa that extend into the abdominopelvic cavity and flare out and help attach the penis, keep it attached. And the bulb is the portion of the corpus spongiosum that actually extends into the abdominopelvic cavity and helps anchor the penis in place as well. So I think that finishes up all of the male reproductive structures, just to kind of give you some perspective on both the diagrams from your textbook and then also the visible body view. So next video lecture, we'll move on to the female.